Welcome to Breaking News to Trading Moves. Usually when we talk about a high-stakes profession, say flying a commercial jet, there is an expectation of precision and control. The pilot relies on mechanical instruments, the absolute laws of aerodynamics, and, well, an objective physical reality.
Right. An airplane doesn't care if the pilot is having a bad day.
Exactly. But then you step into the world of financial market trading, and suddenly those instruments are driven by human panic, euphoria, and extreme uncertainty.
Yeah, the objective reality becomes entirely subjective. A red number flashing on a trading screen at 9:30 in the morning is technically just a data point. But to a human being staring at that screen, it feels like an actual physical threat.
It really does. And today we are arguing over how a professional trader actually survives that panic. Achieving consistent trading performance often comes down to one core question. Is mastering the market a matter of neutralizing our emotional responses to reach a purely probabilistic mindset? Or, conversely, is optimal performance a process of actively utilizing those very emotions as critical feedback data to, continually refine our behavioral routines?
We arrive at this debate by connecting the dots between several distinct areas of research. We are bringing together neuroeconomic fMRI studies mapping the brains of professional traders, Mark Douglas's framework on accepting risk, Brett N. Steenbarger's clinical psychology approach to market behavior, and the academic literature regarding the disposition effect.
It is a lot of ground to cover. It is, yeah. But for this discussion, my position is that achieving consistent trading success requires the complete neutralization of emotional responses and the adoption of an absolute probabilistic mindset.
And my contrasting position is that optimal market performance relies on integrating those very emotions as vital diagnostic data to actively structure and manage our trading routines. You cannot delete human nature.
Well, let me outline my perspective, which builds heavily on Mark Douglas's concept of flawed mental software. Human beings are biologically wired to avoid pain.
Sure.
When our ancestors heard a rustling bush in the savannah, they ran away. They didn't calculate the exact probability of it being the wind versus a predator. They assumed it was a predator so they could survive.
A very healthy instinct, historically speaking.
Right, historically. But in the trading environment, this natural self-preservation instinct causes disastrous errors. We project past emotional pain onto current market data. If we adopt what Douglas calls the 5 truths of market probability, such as recognizing that every moment is totally unique and an edge is merely a higher probability of one outcome over another, we remove the emotional threat of the market entirely.
But that assumes we can just turn off millions of years of evolution like a light switch.
It is about rewiring, not just turning it off. Emotional detachment and the absolute acceptance of risk are the ultimate goals here. Once you truly accept the risk, the market cannot generate information that you interpret as painful. That eliminates the need for courage or nerves of steel altogether.
I come at it from a completely different way. I completely agree with your savannah biology example. But the idea of completely neutralizing human emotion sounds pristine on paper, while frankly entirely ignoring the biological reality of the human brain.
I don't think it ignores biology at all.
It does. Emotions are impossible to neutralize completely, and more importantly, they shouldn't be neutralized. They are crucial data points. Drawing on Brett and Steenbarger's philosophy, emotions reveal what a trader actually believes, what they expect, and exactly how well their current process is functioning.
But if the process is flawed, the emotion is just noise.
Not noise. It's a diagnostic tool. Attempting to suppress emotion is far less effective than building structured routines. Steenbarger advocates for the plan, act, review, refine performance loop. By utilizing deliberate psychological nudges, we can overcome our natural cognitive default settings and translate our raw emotional experiences into measurable, systematic progress.
Let's look at the empirical evidence then, specifically the neurobiological reality of risk and fear. An fMRI study examined professional stock traders under conditions of high financial risk. To truly understand this, we have to picture the physical setup.
Right, the scanner setup.
Yeah, the researchers placed seasoned traders inside an MRI scanner and had them make real-time decisions on high-risk financial setups while mapping the blood oxygen levels in their brains. And they found that these seasoned traders exhibit noticeably reduced amygdala activation during these high-risk decisions.
The amygdala being the fear center?
Exactly, the brain's fear center. At the exact same time, these professionals showed heightened activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the DLPFC. Think of the DLPFC as the brain's executive suite. It governs rational planning, odds calculation, and cognitive control.
Okay, but let me just finish this thought.
This proves that top performers literally override and suppress their emotional fear centers. They detach from the emotion to execute analytical, probabilistic decisions. The biological evidence points directly to the necessity of emotional neutralization.
I will give you the fMRI data. That is a compelling setup. But I just don't buy the interpretation you are pulling from it. You are equating reduced amygdala activity with a total lack of emotion or a complete suppression of feeling.
Because it is reduced. The fear is gone.
However, it's much more likely an indicator of a well-practiced regulatory mechanism. Steenbarger's view aligns perfectly with the rest of that very same study. The research also noted heightened activation in the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, the VMPFC, and the nucleus accumbens during those high-risk decisions.
Right, the reward centers.
Exactly. Let's ground that jargon for a moment. The nucleus accumbens is the brain's reward center. It's the exact part of the brain that lights up when you eat sugar or win a bet. The VMPFC handles subjective valuation. It decides what something is worth to you personally in the present moment.
Right.
The traders in that scanner are not operating as emotionless robots. Their brains have adapted through repeated exposure. The emotion is still being processed, the thrill of reward, the anticipation of the outcome, but it is being translated into calculated action rather than panic. The fear isn't deleted. The emotional energy is simply reallocated toward adaptive valuation.
But if the amygdala is quieted, the fear response is objectively mitigated. I mean, the trader is acting from the prefrontal cortex, making decisions based on statistical probability rather than avoiding a perceived threat. The emotion of fear is neutralized so the intellect can operate without interference.
Reduced doesn't mean eliminated. It means managed. And this brings us directly to the knowing-doing gap in behavioral finance.
Ah, yes, the gap.
Right. This is the chasm between what a professional investor knows they should do rationally and what they actually do when the pressure is on. It's exactly that reward center, the nucleus accumbens we just talked about, that gets us into trouble when the market goes against us.
Because people can't accept the loss.
Precisely. If you are listening to this and wondering why you constantly sell your winning positions for a quick, small profit, but hold on to your losing positions while your account bleeds out, that is the disposition of effect. Schafrin and Statman's classic study demonstrated that this bias is rooted in loss aversion and mental accounting.
And mental accounting is how our brains categorize money subjectively rather than objectively.
Exactly. Think about a trader with a $1,000 paper loss. To the brain, as long as the position remains open, the loss hasn't quite happened. It's just a possibility.
Which is a complete illusion, obviously.
But an illusion the brain believes. The moment the trader clicks sell and closes that losing trade, they convert a paper loss into a realized loss. That action triggers the intense pain of regret. Purely intellectualizing this problem fails because your rational thought is fighting a losing battle against the limbic system.
So what's your solution, if not intellectual detachment?
To combat this, traders need active nudges like automated stop-loss orders or hedonic framing. Hedonic framing is essentially a mental trick where you bundle your losses together to feel the pain only once while separating your wins so you get multiple hits of joy. You need external behavioral architecture because internal suppression is entirely insufficient against millions of years of evolution.
That's a noteworthy point, though I would frame it very differently. Relying on external nudges, like automated stop losses, to protect you from your own mind is, well, it's a temporary crutch.
A crutch, it's a risk management tool.
It doesn't solve the underlying cognitive flaw. According to Mark Douglas's framework, the disposition effect only exists because traders are projecting past pain onto the current moment. They hold the loser at 9:30 in the morning because they cannot accept the reality of the loss.
Right.
The solution is not to slap an external Band-Aid on it. The solution is to complete the mechanical stage of development.
Okay, but what does that mechanical stage look like in actual practice, if not using a behavioral nudge?
It requires committing to a rigorous 20-trade sample size exercise. A trader takes 20 trades using a defined edge, verifying the mathematics of their system. By committing to 20 trades without hesitation, regardless of individual outcomes, the trader actively rewires their core beliefs.
20 trades is going to rewire human evolution?
Think about what happens during this exercise. On trade number 4, when the position goes red, the trader's heart is pounding. They want to pull the plug early and avoid the loss. But they force themselves to stick to the exact parameters of the system.
Okay.
By the time they reach trade number 18, the physical panic is gone. They learn on a cellular level that there is a random distribution between wins and losses over any given sequence. Once a trader truly, completely accepts that randomness, the disposition effect dissolves intrinsically.
That sounds...
They no longer fear the loss, so they don't hold on to it hoping it will turn around. They don't need an external nudge because the mental architecture has been rebuilt. The threat is gone.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that you can permanently delete the pain of regret by completing a simple 20-trade exercise. Human beings aren't algorithms. We have bad days, we experience physical fatigue, we undergo personal stress outside of the markets. All of those factors compromise that pristine mental architecture you are talking about.
It's about building discipline.
Yes, but closing an account forces the pain of admitting a mistake, and that pain is deeply tied to our self-esteem. Steenbarger's approach acknowledges that reality. Let's walk through what the plan, act, review, refine loop actually looks like in practice.
Go ahead.
Imagine a trader staring at the screen and the trade moves rapidly against them. Their heart rate spikes. The impulse is to move the stop loss further away to avoid realizing the loss. Instead of white-knuckling it and pretending they aren't feeling anything, the review stage means they literally journal that heart rate spike. They use that feeling as diagnostic data.
So they stop trading to write in a diary?
Post-trade. It tells the trader, my position size was too large for this level of volatility, or I am trading outside my designated hours. By using that loop, they recognize the trigger and refine their process for the next session by cutting their position size in half. They don't try to transcend human nature. They build guardrails around it to keep themselves safe.
But building guardrails implies that trading requires constant, exhausting emotional management. I maintain that trading is, at its core, a pattern recognition, numbers game. Consistency comes from having rigid rules and completely flexible expectations.
But the market itself isn't rigid.
Think about a casino. We talk about treating trading like a casino, but let's break down how a casino actually operates. A casino doesn't sweat when a player wins a massive hand of blackjack. They don't journal their feelings. They don't check their heart rate, and they certainly don't need behavioral nudges to keep dealing the cards.
True, but
Why? Because they trust the law of large numbers. They know the house edge is small, maybe 1 or 2%, but over 10,000 hands of blackjack, that edge guarantees a profit. The dealer just follows the strict mechanics of the game. Hit on 16, stand on 17. The casino takes every single valid setup, every hand dealt, without hesitation, without hope, and without fear. By treating the market exactly like a casino, treating each trade like a single hand of blackjack, the trader removes those emotional variables. You take the emotion out of the equation entirely, allowing your statistical edge to play out over a large sample size.
That is a compelling argument. But have you considered the limitation of the purely mechanical casino analogy?
I think it holds up perfectly.
It doesn't, because a casino operates in a closed system. A roulette wheel has exactly 38 slots. The probabilities are fixed by the absolute laws of physics. The financial markets are not closed systems. They are living, breathing, constantly evolving organisms driven by global events, central bank policies, algorithmic trading, and millions of irrational human participants.
The mechanics of an edge still apply.
A rigid, emotionless, mechanical approach fails the moment the statistical properties of a market change. A strategy that generates consistent profits in a highly volatile market will get chopped to pieces in a slow, range-bound market.
If the edge fails, you adjust the edge through objective mathematical analysis, not through emotional intuition.
But how do you know the edge is failing before you drain your account? Steenbarger highlights the necessity of adaptive intelligence. Traders must cultivate creativity. They try small, well-defined variations in their execution, measure the outcomes, and integrate what they learn.
Creativity in trading is dangerous.
It's necessary. They track their best trades to figure out what unique skills they applied in that specific market regime. This process of continuous refinement requires acute emotional awareness and continuous active involvement. You cannot be a detached casino operator when the rules of the game change every morning at the opening bell. You have to be engaged, self-aware, and responsive to the friction you feel when a strategy stops working. The emotion of frustration is often the very first signal that the market regime has altered.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. If frustration is your primary signal that the market has altered, you are already acting too late and you are acting subjectively.
I disagree.
If your edge relies on a 20-period moving average crossover and you hit a string of 10 losses, the mathematics tell you the regime has changed. You don't need to feel frustration to read a drawdown on a spreadsheet.
But people don't just read spreadsheets, they feel the drawdown.
The danger of adaptive intelligence is that it often masquerades as an excuse for a lack of discipline. Traders get bored staring at screens all day. They get impatient. They feel the urge to be creative, and suddenly they are deviating from a proven statistically sound plan. They call it adapting, but in reality, they are just succumbing to the exact behavioral flaws that Douglas warns against. They start taking trades outside their system just to feel the thrill of the action.
Well, undisciplined traders absolutely use adaptation as an excuse for reckless behavior. I won't argue with that at all. But that's exactly why Steenbarger advocates for the structured performance loop. Creativity, in his description, isn't airy, impulsive improvisation. It is disciplined experimentation.
It still relies on trusting feelings over math.
Not at all. You define a clear intention before the session even starts. You execute, you record your emotional state, and you refine specific skills based on that data. It's highly methodical. The fMRI data we discussed earlier actually supports this.
How so?
The activation of the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex isn't just suppressing the amygdala. It's actively integrating the reward signals from the ventromedial prefrontal cortex to make complex, contextual decisions. The human brain is a brilliant adaptation machine. Why would we try to numb our most sophisticated processing tool just to act like a rigid roulette wheel?
We numb the emotional pain response because the market is an environment of unlimited, unstructured freedom. Think about it. In our normal lives, society provides structure. Your boss tells you when you arrive, the traffic lights tell you when to stop, the store tells you what an item costs.
Sure.
But in the market, nothing begins until you decide to enter a trade, and nothing ends until you decide to exit. Without the rigid framework of absolute risk acceptance, that unlimited freedom is paralyzing. It leads directly to the errors of the disposition effect we talked about earlier. By rewiring the brain to view trading as a pure probability matrix, we eliminate the paralyzing threat of the unknown, we achieve execution that is effortless and free of internal conflict.
Look, we both agree on the ultimate goal: effortless, consistent execution. But the path to get there really matters. I contend that the path is not through deleting the emotional response, but mastering it. When you look at the research regarding the knowing-doing gap, professionals in any high-stakes field, from emergency room surgeons to professional athletes to seasoned traders, don't lack emotion. They certainly manage it differently. Right. They have simply trained their behavioral loops so thoroughly that their responses to stress become productive rather than destructive. They accept their cognitive limitations and use deliberate practice to build resilience over time. Mastery of the markets is ultimately mastery of the self, and the self inherently includes our emotions.
As we synthesize these concepts, I think treating the market as a pure probability matrix, actively rewiring the brain software to eliminate the threat of emotional pain, remains the most reliable path to consistent execution. By fully accepting that every moment is unique and that any single trade is just a random distribution in a larger sample size, A trader achieves the objective detachment required to let their mathematical edge succeed.
And from the other side, trading mastery requires accepting our inherent cognitive limitations rather than trying to, transcend them. By treating our emotions as valuable diagnostic data and using structured behavioral loops to evaluate our process, we translate raw emotional signals into adaptive market intelligence. We don't suppress human nature, we build a resilient framework that channels it toward continuous improvement.
What stands out from both approaches is an incredible realization about the knowing-doing gap. Knowing the exact mathematical probability of a setup does not stop the human stomach from dropping when the screen flashes red. High academic intelligence does not automatically translate to trading success. Bridging that knowing-doing gap requires rigorous, deliberate psychological conditioning, regardless of which model you apply.
Exactly. Because the market presents an endless, unstructured flow of opportunity and risk, a strong, deliberate internal mental framework is an absolute requirement for survival. You can't just wing it, no matter how smart you are. You need a process to handle the friction between what you know you should do and what your brain is screaming at you to do in the heat of the moment.
Looking at trading psychology through multiple lenses, from the clinical behavioral therapy techniques of Steenbarger to the pure probability mindset of Douglas, right down to the neuroeconomic mapping of the brain, shows us just how complex this field truly is. There is vastly more to explore regarding how human neurobiology interacts with financial markets.
Oh, definitely. We have barely scratched the surface of how our physiology dictates our financial destiny.
As we consider the commercial jet pilot stepping into the cockpit, we realize that in trading we are both the pilot and the instrument panel. We leave you to decide. Do you calibrate your instruments by eliminating the static of emotion, or do you use that static as the very radar that guides you through the storm?